In this video, I'm going to be going over why glute training might be the most underrated but effective way to build your squat and your deadlift. I'm also going to put some timestamps in the description down below so you can jump around to different parts of this video if you don't want to watch it all the way through the first time. Direct butt training and glute workouts tend to get a bad rap and are kind of seen as unnecessary by a lot of people, especially men. And part of that's kind of because you see so many quote-unquote fitness models or fitness Instagram models going in and doing a booty workout, and that building a big butt and an aesthetic looking butt is such a common goal amongst women who go into the gym. But the type of training that I'm talking about here is going to be totally different from these quote-unquote booty workouts. And just to clarify, nothing is wrong with these types of workouts or these goals, but in this video we're going to go through why the glutes are so important in driving up your squat and your deadlift, and then how we can specifically train them to be stronger for that purpose and more functional as well. So first of all, the glutes are actually a group of 3 muscles all grouped together, and the gluteus maximus, which is the one that kind of knows and talks about, is actually the biggest and strongest muscle in the entire body. But the glutes are 3 muscles. The first is the gluteus maximus, that's the biggest one. The gluteus medius, which is a little bit smaller, more lateral, a little bit deeper than the gluteus maximus. And you also have the gluteus minimus, which, just like the name implies, is the smallest one, it's the deepest muscle, and it does the least amount of action, produces the least amount of force, but it's still important, as we see. So the gluteus maximus is responsible for extension and external rotation at the hip, which are 2 of the most powerful motions that happen at the hip. And then the gluteus medius and minimus both work together to do a little bit of internal rotation of the hip, but also abduction, so moving that leg away from the body. So how does all of this relate to the deadlift and squat, and why is this important in getting a strong deadlift and squat? Well, the foundational pattern in both the squat and the deadlift exercise is the hip hinge, so essentially flexing and then extending from the hip, having the hips be the main driver of the power that's moving the load in those movements. And given that the gluteus maximus is one of the most powerful muscles in the body and is one of the main drivers of hip extension, strong glutes will carry over to strong deadlift and squat. Meaning that if you have glutes that fire correctly, especially that gluteus maximus, it's going to be able to push your hips through with more power, giving you more power, more drive on the squat and the deadlift. However, that hip extension is not the only part that plays a role in your strength on the squat and deadlift. You also have to be stable, have stability through that hip, because we've all seen those people who squat down, they come up, their knees cave in, or they're twisting from side to side when they pull a deadlift, or when they come up in a squat, or even go down in a squat. And that's going to come from stability at the hip. That's where that gluteus medius and that gluteus minimus come in, controlling the rotation of the hip, as well as that abduction of the hip is going to help stabilize that joint at the hip, which translates down to the knee, and then the ankle and the foot, which gives you a solid foundation for lifting maximal loads. Therefore, the stronger your glutes are, the more stable you can be, and the more weight you can lift for the squat and the deadlift. So how can we train the glutes so that we get the maximum benefit on the squat and the deadlift? Well, functionally speaking, just to get the glutes to properly fire all the time, we want to focus more on really high repetition sets, so 20 plus. And this is because the glutes are made primarily, not 100%, but mostly of type 2 or slow twitch fibers. These are fibers that help you with endurance. Your glutes are helping you stand and walk all day. They're built to last a long time. So to train them to fire properly, we train that high rep range to train those type 2 fibers. However, to get the maximum benefit on these heavy squats and deadlifts, sets of 1, 2, 3, 4 reps, we need to train the type 1 or explosive or fast twitch fibers in there as well. And for this, we need to do lower rep ranges of maybe 5 to 6 to get that strength benefit, and then maybe that middle range of 8 to 12, 15 to hypertrophy the muscle, because a bigger muscle, the more cross-sectional area a muscle has, the stronger it will be. So I'm going to go through a couple of exercises that I use personally for myself and my clients that we can use to train the glutes through these different rep ranges and hit all 3 parts of the glute, the max, the med, and the min, to hit them functionally, get them to fire better. I'm going to go through how I use them for myself in my own workout programs and how I throw them in for my clients in their workout routines. And when I threw these in for myself, I personally saw a 20 plus pound increase in both my squat and my deadlift in just a couple of weeks. So these are really, really useful for you guys. So the first movement is going to be this barbell hip thrust. And when I say that I do these, I don't mean I'm doing them like you see most people doing these in the gym, thrusting their back into it, getting their legs into it. I focus on doing these really, really strict to try to isolate the glutes and get them to fire as maximally as possible. So the way I do this is I usually have a mini band around my knees or a client's knees for most people, because it kind of helps think about that external rotation and that abduction at the hip by subconsciously pushing against that band. You don't really have to think about it. And then I like to set up on a 12-inch box. A lot of people use a bench or like a higher riser than that. But I like the 12-inch because unless somebody's really, really tall or really, really short, it's going to be the best to get the best range of motion out of the hips without having to worry about the length of the tibia or the legs getting into it or the back's getting into it. And when I do these, I like to isolate the movement of the hips as much as we possibly can, but also get the biggest range of motion we can without getting the legs to join in. So we want to focus on that posterior tilt of the pelvis as much as possible, which is sending the hips into flexion, and then we're using the glutes to drive into extension as much as we can. I like to tell people, and in my own head I think about it too, getting all the way to the top, and then by only squeezing the butt cheeks, get even just a little bit higher, which helps to maximize the contraction through the glutes. And when I do this, I'll start with a set of probably 20 to 30 reps for most clients and for myself, and that kind of trains that functional part of the glutes, those type 2 fibers, getting the glutes to fire fully and properly. And for some people, if your goal is not to squat 500 pounds or deadlift 800 pounds or something like that, those high rep sets will be enough for you, and that'll help you maintain longevity and be healthy and have good firing glutes all the time. But since we're talking about getting stronger on the squat and deadlift, I will then transition down. So I'll do a set of about 20 to 30 reps, and then I'll go on and I'll do a set of probably 15 or so reps. So getting more into that hypertrophy territory, but still kind of high rep. Then I'll do another set of maybe 10 to 12, and then I'll do a couple sets in that 6 to 8 rep range, really heavy, still trying to be really strict on form, but now we're really focusing on the strength through those glutes, the hypertrophy and strength, which is going to carry over also to the squat and the deadlift and those maximal effort reps. And as I'm going down in reps on these sets, I'm also increasing the weight so that the difficulty stays about the same. When you get to the end of these sets, it should be really, really challenging, especially in these high rep sets. The last 15 reps should really burn. You're really driving hard. And then on those lower rep sets of 6 to 8, you should be going as heavy as you can while still getting that maximal range of motion using only the hips, only the glutes, but it should still be equally as hard when you get to that 6th, 7th, 8th rep. So I will usually throw these into my routine about 1 time per week. I'll start with those high rep sets, move down to lower. For all my clients, I usually do about 1 time per week them doing this, because most of my clients are just trying to be more functional. But also sometimes for myself, if I'm doing a heavy squat day or a heavy deadlift day, I'll do a set of body weight hip thrusts, right? All that same setup applies, but just body weight. Do a couple sets of 20, 30, maybe even 40 reps, just to really get those type 2 fibers going, really get my glutes firing, so that I can have the most effective squat and deadlift form that I possibly can, so I can get that maximal hip power and lift the most weight possible. So the other exercise I use a lot is kind of an RDL, a single leg RDL variation. It's kind of a variation of the STAR balance test. And I do this to target that glute med and glute mid, because remember, those help in the rotation of the hip as well as add in some of that abduction. And so we want to help train those for some balance and stability. So the way I set this up, usually I have some targets. I usually do 3 targets around myself or my clients, just to make it a little bit easier, give a visual representation. And I'll do that partial hip hinge down to each of those targets, going one slightly to the left, one slightly to the right, and then one straight in front of them. This is a few things. One, since those muscles work on that rotation of the hip and the abduction, so this way rotationally, we want to train them in multiple ranges of motion, multiple angles. So going down at these angles works on that rotation, stabilizing the body while it's at all of those different angles. The second thing this exercise is really good for is because we're still working on that hip hinge pattern, which is really helpful for the squat and the deadlift as we discussed. It's only a slight hip hinge, right? We're not going into full RDL, especially if we're going to those targets. It's usually a limited range of motion. And what this does is it doesn't go down so far that the hamstrings really take over, because the hamstrings tend to kind of override the glutes, because your body doesn't want to fire your glutes, right? It's a really big muscle. Your body's always trying to conserve energy. The bigger muscle is going to use more energy, so your body's going to say, hey, let the hamstrings do the work of this. It's going to take less energy. So we don't go down quite as far, and then we can maximally focus on driving the glutes through to come up for that hip hinge, which is going to carry over more to that direct glute training and have more of an effect on our squat and our deadlift. For myself, I'll use this again kind of as a warm-up usually, and I'll usually do sets of about 8 to 10 here on each side, like total reps. So maybe like 2 or 3 times through. If you're using 3 targets, maybe go like 2 or 3 times through. So we want to stick a little bit lower rep range here to build that neural pathway, because this balance muscle firing thing is going to be more neural, right? It's less muscle strength and more how coordinated are we, how is the brain talking to the muscle, and how coordinated is that, which is going to carry over more to your balance, make you more even, and give you more power and dynamic stability through that squat and through that deadlift. So hopefully that was really helpful for you guys. Hopefully you took some away from that and you can see an increase in your squat and your deadlift, or if you're training people, hopefully you learned some stuff that can help you get your clients to fire their glutes a little better, get them a little stronger, a little more functional. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment down below or DM me on my Instagram. That's another really good way to get a hold of me. Otherwise, please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed this content. I'll see you guys in the next video.